Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading out of History Magazine. My channel members get to pick the History Magazine articles from now on. So I'm going to read 2 articles out of here. It will be the Angkor Sacred City of Stone article and Death to Caesar, Assassination Conspiracy. These were requested by Lynn Mendoza and Stentard, so this episode is for you. Thank you for picking some great ones. I also ran a poll on my community tab asking which bonus mini article you guys would like to hear, and just barely winning was this article about the tomb of Hetepheres in Giza. So we're going to start with that one. It's in the very back of the magazine. Here we go. Start with this and then get into the big articles. So, starting with Giza's untouched royal tomb. I'm going to have to go like this at the very back. Howard Carter's sensational 1922 discovery of King Tutankhamun's treasure-filled tomb sparked a fascination with all things ancient Egyptian across Europe and the United States. Hopes were high that more exciting discoveries were coming, not least among the archaeologists working in sites across Egypt. A spirit of intense rivalry marked relations among this group of largely Western scholars, who all jockeyed for the most promising sites while jealously monitoring their competitors' progress. From the early 1900s, the Giza Plateau, site of Egypt's 3 iconic pyramids, was being systematically excavated by an international group of scholars. A part of this vast terrain fell to the American archaeologist George Reisner. On February 2nd, 1925, Reisner's photographer Mohammedani Ibrahim was working near the Great Pyramid, erected by Pharaoh Khufu in the 3rd millennium BCE. Ibrahim looked down and noticed his tripod was resting on a white layer of plaster, possibly the top of a structure hidden below. The boss had to be informed, but there was one problem. Reisner was, at that moment, not in Egypt, but in Boston, carrying out his duties as professor of Egyptology at Harvard University. His team started digging in his absence and found an irregularly cut, narrow shaft that went down 85 feet. It was filled with rubble. This sign was a strong indication that they had discovered a tomb. But since Giza had been extensively looted over thousands of years, the chances of an intact burial were very low. Hold on a sec. I got some chamomile tea here for my throat. It's at the perfect temperature, so I want to down that while it's still nice and hot. On Saturday, March 7th, as Reisner was preparing his Monday morning lecture, thousands of miles away, his team finally excavated the full shaft and were awestruck by what they found. T.R.D. Greenlees recorded the moment in his diary. At 3:30 p.m., it was observed that the rock surface on the south fell away at an angle, and immediately afterwards the top of the door to a chamber was revealed. One limestone block was loosened and removed in order to see in. A large chamber is visible, extending up a little to east and west of the door. It is possible to see what appears to be a sarcophagus in the foreground, upon which are several staves or maces with gilded tops. A good deal of gilding appears on other objects upon the ground. It is certain that the burial is intact. For the excavators, it was their moment of triumph. But later that week, Reisner sent a telegraph from Boston ordering that the work halt in Egypt. The tomb would be resealed. It's absolutely the best cup of chamomile I've had in a long time. Ancient and modern. Born in 1867 in Indianapolis, George Reisner commanded huge respect in Egyptology circles, having carried out a major archaeological survey of the Nubia region, which is today in southern Egypt and Sudan, called it. In 1902, French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero divided out the Giza Plateau among the best excavators of the time in a bid to prevent looting and deterioration. The central section of the huge site was awarded to Reisner. Reisner was working in the new era of 20th century technology. He could use the telegraph to send transatlantic communiques with his team, but he was modern in another way too. Carter's stunning find of Tutankhamun's tomb had made Reisner realize the power of public relations. His decision to reseal the intact tomb, officially labeled G7000X, was based on several factors, including his belief that he was the only person sufficiently competent to undertake the full excavation. By delaying the dig until he could travel to Egypt, Reisner could also control the narrative. Media relations were a key part of that process. Leaks from Reisner's own team, who let a U.S. news photographer snap them, led to revelations in the London press of a major new find. Speculation swirled that the tomb was that of 4th Dynasty pharaoh Snefru. From Boston, Reisner countered by asserting his belief that it belonged to a royal woman. Reisner's duties in the U.S. delayed the reopening of tomb G7000X until January 1926. On finally entering the chamber containing the sarcophagus, Reisner discovered that the gold-cased furniture inside was damaged by water, and in such poor condition that he feared it would crumble. The delicate work to retrieve the fragments of wood and inlay were painstaking. In addition to a canopy and bed, an armchair and an elaborate carrying chair were recovered. The tomb's owner was inscribed on the carrying chair, and it confirmed Reisner's notion that the tomb belonged to a woman, Hetepheres, who was the mother of Khufu, the second king of the 4th dynasty and builder of the Great Pyramid. Her tomb had laid hidden in... I'm stuck. There we go. Her tomb had laid hidden in the shadow of that monument for over 4 millennia. Missing body. Hetepheres' alabaster sarcophagus was opened in March 1927, but it contained no human remains. Historians still debate what might have happened to them. Reisner suggested Hetepheres was originally buried near her husband, Snefru, at Dashur. Khufu then created the new burial site at Giza, but the remains of his mother were never transferred there. Others propose she was buried in the small pyramid G1A at the foot of the Great Pyramid. Following the excavation, the armchair was restored and is now displayed at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. After Reisner's death in 1942, renewed interest in the retrieved fragments from tomb G7000X spurred the mammoth task of reconstructing the elaborate carrying chair in all its golden splendor. It is housed today at the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East in Cambridge, Massachusetts. All right. Interesting, right? You guys picked a good one. But let's head over to ancient Rome and read about the Ides of March. Death comes to Caesar. Which, I feel like the Ides of March is in our, regular vocab, and people don't really understand why. So let me teach you why we say the Ides of March when we refer to March 15th. Here we go. The first blow fell at noon on March 15th, 44 BCE. The conspirators suddenly bared their daggers and rushed upon him, writes Nicholas of Damascus, a 1st century BC historian. First, Publius Servilius Casca stabbed him on the left shoulder, a little above the collarbone, at which he had aimed but missed through nervousness. After Casca's glancing blow, Julius Caesar snatched his toga from Tullius Cimber, seized Casca's hand, sprang from his chair, turned around, and hurled Casca with great violence, according to the Greek historian Appian of Alexandria. Suetonius, a Roman biographer and antiquarian, offers a slightly different account. Caesar caught Casca's arm and ran it through with his stylus, a sharp tool used for writing on wax tablets that could rip through flesh. At almost the same instant, both cried out, writes Plutarch, the Greek biographer and historian, describing how Caesar and Casca reacted. Caesar in Latin asked, "Accursed Casca, what does thou?" Casca in Greek called to his nearby siblings Gaius, "Brother, help." The lethal attack progressed apace. Appian writes that Cassius wounded Caesar in the face, Brutus smote him in the thigh, and Bucolianus between the shoulder blades. In response to Servilius Casca's cry for help, writes Nicholas, his brother Gaius drove the sword into Caesar's side. The majority of the Roman Senate, not privy to the assassination plot, sat in horrified silence, too scared to flee, though some rushed into the crowd outside. The frenzied scene that unfolded that fateful Ides of March was a blur of blood and gore. This magazine was the March-April issue, by the way, so they had to do Ides of March, right? Murderous details. The modern understanding of the attack hinges on the accounts of several ancient sources. Each version ends the same way, with Caesar dead and the future of Rome uncertain, but they differ slightly in their perspectives and analyses. Plutarch, for instance, says the ruler fought back when attacked. Caesar hemmed in from all sides, whichever way he turned, confronting blows of weapons aimed at his face and eyes, driven hither and thither like a wild beast, was entangled in the hands of all, for all had to take part in the sacrifice and taste of the slaughter. Appian's account is similar. After being stabbed several times, with rage and outcry Caesar turned now upon one and now upon another, like a wild animal. In Suetonius' version, however, Caesar stopped fighting after the first 2 blows. With his right hand he pulled his toga up to cover his head. With his left he loosened its folds, so that they dropped down and kept his legs covered as he fell. Caesar died uttering not a word, but merely a groan at the first stroke. Interesting. I feel like we all know the Shakespeare one more than the historical one. Dio Cassius, a Roman historian writing in the 3rd century, says that Caesar was caught off guard by the attack and could not put up a defense. By reason of their numbers, Caesar was unable to say or do anything, but veiling his face was slain with many wounds. Under the massive wounds, Nicholas writes, Caesar fell at the foot of Pompey's statue. Everyone wanted to seem to have a part in that murder, and there is not one of them who failed to strike his body as it lay there. Yet when a forensics expert reconstructed the crime in 2003, he concluded that only 5 to 10 assailants could have actually stabbed Caesar during the fray. It would have been impossible for more to have simultaneously attacked a single person, given the logistics and the venue's dimensions, a space that led to friendly fire casualties during the attack. When Cassius cutting Brutus's hand and Minucius stabbing Rubrius in the thigh, Caesar himself was stabbed 35 times. In Nicholas's telling, Appian, Plutarch, and Suetonius put the figure at 23. Suetonius describes how Antistius, a physician, examined the body in one of the world's first recorded autopsies, and found that one wound alone had been fatal, the second one in the breast, a blow credited to Gaius Casca in Nicholas's account. A little tea break. So good. Once Caesar was dead, Brutus walked to the center of the Curia to speak, but no one stayed to listen. The remaining senators fled in terror, fearful that they would be pursued. At that moment it wasn't clear among the group who was a conspirator, and whether the attack would extend to any of Julius Caesar's supporters. Plutarch describes the assassinations' sense of elation as they too left the Senate house, not like fugitives, but with glad faces and full of confidence. They hurried to broadcast to the people that Rome was rid of its tyrant. In a suddenly silent Curia, only a bloody corpse remained. Men and motives. By the time Julius Caesar stepped in front of the Senate on that fateful day, the Roman Republic had been ailing for years. Economic inequality, political gridlock, and civil wars had weakened the nearly 500-year-old republic in the century prior to Caesar's rise. Yet Caesar was enormously popular with the people of Rome, a successful military leader who defeated his ally turned adversary Pompey after a 4-year-long civil war, subdued Egypt and allied with Cleopatra, their love child, Caesarion, aka Ptolemy Caesar, later ruled that country with his mother, and expanded the republic to include parts of modern-day Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Spain, and France. He also passed laws over the Senate's objection that helped the poor, and was a beloved author who wrote frequently about his travels, theories, and political philosophy. There we go. Many members of the Senate, a group of appointed, not elected political leaders, that included Optimates, a small elite, conservative group of Caesar's enemies that had backed Pompey, resented Caesar's popularity and perceived arrogance. As they saw it, Caesar's increasingly autocratic reign threatened the Republic. He frequently bypassed the Senate on deciding important matters, controlled the treasury, and bought the personal loyalty of the army by pledging to give retiring soldiers public land as property. He stamped his image on coins, reserved the right to accept or reject election results for magistrate and other lower offices, and, perhaps worst of all, was rumored to be ready to declare himself king. Rome had been stridently anti-monarchist since 509 BCE, when Lucius Tarquinius Superbus was overthrown and prided itself greatly on its liberty. To be accused of coveting a throne was an egregious affront. Opponents worried that Caesar wanted to restore the monarchy with himself in control, though he had publicly refused a symbolic golden crown offered to him at the pastoral Lupercalia festival by his cousin and close ally Marcus Antonius, or Mark Antony. His behavior seemed to corroborate this thinking. He had installed his friends in positions of power, placed his statues in temples, and reacted with fury when a diadem placed on one of them was removed. He also wore the high red boots of Italian kings and donned triumphal dress, symbolizing martial victory, whenever he liked. Even his habit of granting clemency to opponents could be seen as a reflection of sovereign thinking. To show mercy, one had to be in a position to have power over someone else. One had to be a king. Such was the situation in 44 BCE. After his stunning victories at the battles of Pharsalus, Thapsus, and Munda between 48 and 45 BCE, Caesar had acted in a way that was largely unprecedented among the victors of civil wars. He let the losers live because he hoped to join their power with his. It was in this way that Brutus, who'd fought against Caesar under Pompey, and Cassius, who had commanded Pompey's fleet against Caesar at Pharsalus, were pardoned rather than executed. Caesar appointed both men to the position of praetor in 44 BCE, a benevolence that riled many. They saw the dictator's clemency as both humiliating and arbitrary, running contrary to the principles of law, the mark of a tyrant. Once Caesar became dictator for life, a magistracy that placed the maximum civil and military powers in his hands. The political career of every Roman rested with him. It was a bitter affront to the Optimates, I said Optimates. Optimates, who had been pardoned by Caesar but now found themselves dependent on his whims. These officials decided to strike the ultimate blow against his power. All of the assassins on the Ides of March belonged to Caesar's inner circle, enemies he had forgiven and friends he had promoted. What brought these liberators together was a fear that the concentration of absolute power in a single man threatened the Republic's democratic institutions. The conspirators. At least 60 people, and perhaps more than 80, were involved in the plot against Caesar. The mastermind of the conspiracy was Cassius, who understood that he needed to collaborate with someone who would lend political gravitas to a future attack, raising it above the level of petty personal revenge. He chose his brother-in-law Marcus Junius Brutus, a respected Optimate. His family claimed to descend by paternal line from Lucius Junius Brutus, who was said to have founded the Roman Republic. With Cassius planning in the background and Brutus acting as the figurehead, the alliance was forged. Among the latter group, two men stand out, Gaius Trebonius and Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, both generals who had fought alongside Caesar in Gaul and the Civil War. The latter was a distant cousin of Brutus and a close friend of Caesar. Plutarch recounts that a year before, after Caesar's victory in Munda, Trebonius had sounded out Mark Antony about the possibility of joining an assassination. Nothing more is known of the plot except that Mark Antony declined to join it, yet he also failed to inform Caesar that a scheme was being hatched against him. When Trebonius told the plotters that Mark Antony would not participate, they agitated to kill the Roman general as well, but Brutus objected. He believed that getting rid of Caesar was an act of universal justice, while killing Mark Antony would be seen as a partisan act. Instead, they decided that on the day of the assassination, they would keep Mark Antony distracted outside the Senate. He was a senator as well as a general, in case he tried to come to Caesar's aid during the attack. Caesar had been due to leave for a long campaign against the Parthians 2 days after the Ides of March. Ides was a name given to the middle day of each month, but had summoned the Senate to meet once more before he left. According to Suetonius, it was rumored that at this meeting a proposal would be made to proclaim Caesar king of the non-Italian provinces, a proposal the conspirators did not want to approve. They also knew that once Caesar left Rome with his legions, he would be out of their reach. According to Cicero, a senator at the time, and a very well-informed one, the Senate meeting had actually been called to finalize a decision as to who would replace Caesar as consul when he left Rome. That year, Caesar and Mark Antony were joint consuls. With Caesar gone, Mark Antony and the new appointee would constitute the highest authority in Rome. In some ways, the stage was set for them. Though Caesar had heard rumors of assassination plots against him, some of which expressly mentioned Brutus, he had decided to ignore them in the belief that Brutus and others would never act against him out of fear that a new civil war would be unleashed if he were to die. Hold on, one more sip. I finished it. Perfect. Oh my gosh. It didn't even get a little bit cold. Amazing. Caesar had also recently diminished his official escort of bodyguards after the senators vowed to protect him with their own lives in a pledge of political loyalty. Yet he would be far from unprotected on the Ides. 24 lictors in charge of safeguarding the magistrates walked before him wherever he went. He was also accompanied around the city by friends and stalwart followers, some seeking favors, others just a glimpse of the great man. After considering several options, the conspirators decided to make their move during the Senate session, where Caesar's entourage would be reduced. Only senators could attend. And the emperor would be unarmed. Weapons were forbidden inside the Senate, so the conspirators had to carry theirs carefully concealed. Dreams and omens. On the night of March 14th to 15th, Caesar's wife of 15 years, Calpurnia, had vivid nightmares in which she saw her husband covered in blood. The next morning she begged him not to go to the Senate. The emperor claimed not to be superstitious, only a little stitious, but he was disturbed by his wife's visions, and by his own dreams that night of rising above the clouds, leaving Rome at his feet, trembling as Jupiter took him by the hand. So in the morning he took her dream seriously. He ordered several animal sacrifices to discern the future. All the omens were unfavorable. A month earlier, a soothsayer, a haruspex named Spurina, had warned Caesar of the peril before him. On February 15th, writes Suetonius, Spurina had read sacrificed animal entrails to mean that Caesar faced danger, which would not come later than the Ides of March. On top of everything, Caesar was physically ailing. According to Nicholas of Damascus, Caesar's physicians tried to stop him from going to the Senate that day on account of vertigos to which he was sometimes subject, and from which he was at that time suffering. The long-held theory is that Caesar had epilepsy. It is also possible he suffered a mini-stroke. As the Ides dawned, Caesar felt exhausted and nauseated. According to Suetonius, he decided to stay home and send Mark Antony to the Senate to dissolve the session. Yet at that crucial moment, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus appeared and convinced his friend Caesar to go to the Senate as planned, telling the dictator he would appear ridiculous if he changed his plans because of his wife's dream. If the dictator felt genuinely ill, he could avoid offending the senators by showing up briefly at the Senate and then postponing the session. Decimus Brutus's reasoning worked, and Caesar left his house at 11 a.m. in a litter borne by 4 slaves, preceded by the lictors. Caesar was headed for the Theater of Pompey, a huge complex built by his rival on the outskirts of Rome. Within it was the Curia, or Senate House, where the meeting would take place. On the way, a crowd surrounded the leader and overwhelmed Caesar with petitions. Amid the noise, Caesar overlooked a note that someone handed him, warning him of the plot. It may have been proffered by Artemidorus of Damascus, a Greek teacher from Brutus's circle. According to Nicholas of Damascus, the note was found near Caesar's corpse among the other papers. Plutarch wrote, "The conspirators all hastened to the portico of Pompeii and waited there, expecting that Caesar would straightway come to the meeting. Since it was forbidden to carry arms in the Senate, Brutus's dagger was hidden under his robe. Other senators concealed their weapons in the document boxes that young slaves, called capsari, had brought into the compound. Caesar arrived. As he walked through the door, the senators rose. The chamber was not much bigger than a modern tennis court, and at least 200 men had to be present to comprise the quorum. There was little room to maneuver." That's what it looks like today, isn't that something? The attack. Not all of the conspirators were members of the Senate, and it's not clear how many of the standing senators wished to see Caesar dead. In front of their seats rose the platform from which Caesar would preside over the session from a golden throne. The conspirators hurried to gather around the throne. As soon as Caesar was seated, and while the rest of the senators were still standing as a show of respect, the assassins, writes Plutarch, surrounded him in a body, putting forward Tullius Cimber of their number with a plea on behalf of his brother who was in exile. The others all joined in his pleas, and clasping Caesar's hand, kissed his breast and his head. At first Caesar brushed off the requests, but when the senators would not let him go, he tried to get up by force. It was then that Tullius, who may have been kneeling before Caesar, grasped his toga at the shoulders in a gesture of supplication. This prevented Caesar from standing up and left his neck exposed. According to Suetonius, Caesar then shouted, "Why, this is violence." Appian says Tullius then shouted, "What are you waiting for?" The answer, of course, was nothing. The rest, as they say, was history. The aftermath. After Caesar's death, Mark Antony staged a grand funeral for Caesar. The dictator's popularity was such that a riot developed, leading to Caesar's impromptu cremation in the Forum. Some of the assassins, including Brutus and Cassius, took this as a cue to leave Rome, though neither gave up their official positions. The remaining assassins put a positive spin on the events, celebrating it as an end to tyranny. An amnesty was negotiated through a Senate agreement to ratify all of Caesar's decisions. A new coin was minted showing 2 daggers and the pileus, a cap of liberty worn by freed Roman slaves, with the date shown as the Ides of March. I think there's a picture of that over here. Let me see. Up here, right? Right here. Ides of March. It was a celebration of liberty, according to historian Mary Beard, that resonated in Rome much like Bastille Day does in modern France. Ultimately, the death of Julius Caesar had the opposite impact of what the assassins had hoped. The daggers they thrust into him that March day dealt a fatal blow to the already wounded Roman Republic and paved the way for empire. Much of the public turned against the assassins, and civil wars ensued. Popular sentiment swung back towards Caesar. A comet, visible during the day for a week, appeared in the sky during the games held in his honor, a sure sign that he was becoming divine. Within 2 years, in fact, he would be fully deified. Caesar's death opened the way for his 19-year-old heir and adoptive son, Octavian, to emerge as Rome's first de facto emperor, the future Augustus. Octavian would spend the next few years hunting down Caesar's murderers. The ringleaders, Brutus and Cassius, fell in 42 BCE, and the last one would perish 8 years later. All right, and finally tonight, we're heading to South Asia, to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat. Here we go. Appearing like a fever dream amid a thick, humid jungle is Angkor Wat, a soaring, sumptuous city of stone with elegant spires and elevated towers, covered galleries and airy courtyards, ornate walkways and intricate bas-relief carvings. Situated on the shores of Tonle Sap, a lake in northwest Cambodia, this temple complex is a nearly 900-year-old ruin from the ancient Khmer Empire. Among the hundreds of surviving temples in the region, the vast complex is easily Cambodia's most famous sacred site. It appears on the nation's current flag and is revered for good reason. Comprising over 1,000 buildings and covering some 400 acres, it is the world's largest religious structure and one of humanity's cultural wonders. Construction of Angkor Wat began in the first half of the 12th century by the Khmer king Suryavarman II. It was probably intended to serve as his vast funerary temple where his remains would rest for eternity. Heavily influenced by Hinduism, the site, whose name means City of Temples in Khmer, was originally called Vra Visnuloka, or Sacred Dwelling of Vishnu, and dedicated to 3 Hindu deities, the namesake Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. Hindu deities are recognizable among the complex's many bas-relief carvings. The structure's most prominent architectural feature is its central quincunx. 5 conically shaped towers, 4 in the corners, 1 in the middle, built on graduated tiers. Rows of lotuses taper to a point near the top, symbolizing the peaks of Mount Meru, the dwelling place of the gods and center of the universe. Indeed, Angkor Wat was conceived as an earthly model of the cosmos, a miniature replica of the universe in stone, with its central tower rising nearly 200 feet in the air. The outer wall corresponds to the mountains at the edge of the world. The surrounding 3-mile-long moat symbolizes the oceans beyond them. One accesses the site by crossing a 617-foot bridge and then passing through 3 galleries on the way to the temple itself. The inner walls are covered with bas-relief sculptures representing Hindu gods and ancient Khmer scenes, as well as episodes from 2 Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And that's where we are in the world. There's Angkor in Cambodia. Oh, what a great picture. Power of the Khmer. The Khmer flourished from the 9th to the 15th centuries, its rulers presiding over a sprawling, prosperous, and sophisticated empire that stretched across much of mainland Southeast Asia, from modern-day Myanmar/Burma to Vietnam. It was linked by a network of river routes and elevated roads. Agricultural production thrived during this period, perhaps thanks to the higher temperatures and nourishing rains during the so-called medieval warm period. The Angkor Wat temple complex was built alongside the ancient Khmer capital Angkor, the focus of elaborate building projects since the dawn of the empire, including the 9th century Phnom Baking temple that overlooks Angkor Wat to this day. In the 12th century, as work advanced on Angkor Wat under Suryavarman II, a religious shift from Hinduism toward Buddhism was intensifying across the Khmer lands. Buddhism had coexisted peacefully with Hinduism for many years. It was first brought to Cambodia around the 5th century, carried by traders and missionaries from India, a culture that exerted a significant influence on Cambodian history. India had already brought Hinduism to the region, and the Khmer language is related to Sanskrit. Some 30 years after Suryavarman II's death, King Jayavarman VII came to the throne in 1181. He revived Khmer fortunes after the kingdom was invaded by the neighboring Cham, and he solidified the status of Buddhism by making it the state religion. Jayavarman VII's face is believed to have been the model for the many visages that decorate the Bayon Temple in nearby Angkor Thom. Built alongside Angkor Wat, this new fortified Khmer capital marked a new high in Khmer power. The city's population swelled to a then record 750,000. Angkor Wat continued to be a Hindu temple until the 1300s, when it was formally rededicated as a Buddhist site. In keeping with Buddhist tolerance for Hinduism, the iconography of its great reliefs was not demolished or replaced, although Buddhist statues were added. Around this time, the Khmer Empire started to decline, the result of a complex mixture of factors. In the 1430s, the Khmer rulers abandoned the great complexes of Angkor and relocated to the newly established Phnom Penh to the south. Oh, that's gorgeous. Wow, that's incredible. Historians have put forward various theories to explain the move. An important factor was likely the military setback suffered at the hands of the neighboring Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya in present-day Thailand. which mounted numerous attacks over the years. Others credit shifting religious observances. The growing predominance of Theravada Buddhism during the 13th and 14th centuries did not sit easily with the more hierarchical Hinduism of the Khmer elites. Environment also likely played a role. Angkor boasted an extensive, advanced system of artificial canals, dikes, and reservoirs, the largest of which, West Baray, is 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, a remarkable feat of hydraulic engineering for the time. The water harnessed by this network slaked the thirst of 750,000 residents in the world's largest pre-industrial city, as well as irrigating the rice fields. Historians believe a series of heavy monsoons, followed by drought, may have disabled the delicate irrigation infrastructure and so hastened the demise of the site. Lost and found. The jungle reclaimed the area, and the urban area was soon subsumed by dense vegetation. Vast cotton silk trees grew up through the fallen towers, their silvery roots entwining pillars and walls, until jungle and ruin became indivisible. But one temple was never abandoned, Angkor Wat itself. Between the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th, the complex was restructured, transformed by Buddhist monks into a site for pilgrimages. In the middle of the 16th century, Europeans began to arrive in Angkor, first Portuguese merchants around 1555, then missionaries bent on spreading Catholicism in the region. The Portuguese merchant and historian Diogo do Chuto, I think, described how the Cambodian jungle was concealing an abandoned city whose walls are entirely built with hewn stone, so perfect and so well arranged that they seem to constitute just one stone, which is almost like marble. After the Portuguese came Spanish merchants and missionaries. Among them was Fray Gabriel Quiroga de San Antonio, who in 1604 published a brief and truthful relation of events in the Kingdom of Cambodia. His description reveals a deep appreciation and respect. Let's see what he said. Ooh, what a neat photograph. From 1866. He said, "This city is on the banks of the river Mekong, 170 leagues from the sea. The flood waters and tides of the river lap the city as those of the Guadalquivir do Seville. It is marvelously constructed. The houses are made of stone and are very beautiful, arranged in a very orderly way along streets, and the craftsmanship of their facades and patios, halls and chambers seems Roman. The lure of Angkor." Look at this graffiti of a Portuguese ship, or a Dutch East India ship. How weird. Lure of Angkor. Over the next few centuries, Angkor exerted a magnetic pull on travelers from abroad, as Cambodia received numerous merchants from Southeast Asia, especially Muslim Malays and Japanese Buddhists. Some even left graffiti on the walls of Angkor Wat. There are 14 examples dated from 1612 to 1632. The first known map of Angkor, an annotated colored plan, was created by one of these Japanese visitors. The Spanish and Portuguese presence diminished, and the Dutch established a post of the Dutch East India Company in Cambodia. Whether representatives visited Angkor itself is unknown, but the discovery of a Dutch ship painted on the walls of the main entrance to the Angkor temple attests to the impact on local life. Yeah, that's wild. The European fascination with Angkor reached a fever pitch in the 19th century. In late 1859, the French explorer and naturalist Henri Mohut visited Angkor under the patronage of the Royal Geographical Society of London. Look at this. Ooh, that's a great statue. Mohut, I think. Mohut had set sail for Bangkok in April 1858, accompanied by his dog Tintin, to gather plant and animal specimens for the region of European collectors. Mohut spent 3 months in Angkor, exploring the ruins, sketching its temples, and recording his impressions in his diaries, not only of Angkor itself, but of the Khmer people as well. In the province still bearing the name of Angkor, ruins of such grandeur to the first view, one is filled with profound admiration and cannot but ask what has become of this powerful race, so civilized, so enlightened, the authors of these gigantic works. This intimate vision of Angkor, accompanied by Mohod's evocative drawings, was published in 1864 and drew European attention to the ancient Cambodian capital. In 1867, a French expedition arrived in the area, ostensibly to chart the course of the Mekong River. One of the members was a promising young artist named Louis de Laporte. His idealized illustrations of Angkor, included in 2 publications produced by the expedition, helped cement the popularity of the temples in the Western mind. Reproductions of Cambodian art were exhibited at the popular world exhibitions between 1867 and 1922. At the 1931 Paris Colonial Exhibition, a spectacular replica of the Angkor Wat temple was erected. The restoration of the temples, which began in 1907, opened the latest chapter in Angkor's long story. Since then, the complex called Angkor Archaeological Park has become one of the richest, most important archaeological sites in the world. In 1992, it was established as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its cultural influence. Today, Angkor Wat is also essential to Cambodia's economic prosperity, as it continues to be one of the nation's biggest attractions. Even in the 21st century, it's hard not to see the value of an epic 12th century vision of eternity. Very cool. Alright, that's the end of our magazine for tonight. We'll definitely read more out of this magazine, don't worry, there are lots of other articles. This is so cool. But anyway, I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night. I'm gonna go rest my voice. Good night. Good night.